This video is about the Sequentix Cirklon and how I use it to control my 4U modular with help from the Cirklon BOB Model hCB from Northern Light Modular. I have the Cirklon connected to the Booklet 225E MIDI USB decoder with a standard MIDI cable. This way the Cirklon can sequence the principal oscillator with the 261E and oscillator A in the Studio H DPO via the internal buses. But both these oscillators are dual and you can't control the remaining two modulation sections with an internal bus. I could use an external bus on the 225E, but the pitch inputs on especially the Booklet E oscillators are not that reliable. Here it makes sense to connect the Cirklon directly via the hCB. The Cirklon will then help you tame the tracking of the oscillators with its internal calibration tool. The hCB gives you 24 patch points that can be configured to send out pitch CV, velocity, pulses, or ADSR envelopes, and 4 of the outputs can work as inputs, allowing you to control parameters on the Cirklon or other outboard equipment connected to one of the Cirklon's MIDI ports. Once you have configured all your outputs, it's a good idea to write down your patch connections. For that, I've made this PDF that you can find a link to in the description. The CVIO configuration menu can be accessed from either the song, scene, or track page. Press the menu button, press encoder 11, choose more, and scroll down and select CVIO Config. The first 16 pages of the CVIO configuration covers the 16 blue outputs. I'm using the value encoder to move horizontal and the row encoder to move vertical, but you can also use encoder 5 for this. Encoders 6 to 11 change the values in the selected row. Starting from left to right, Chan stands for channel. This is where you set the MIDI channel. Range defines the range of notes that get sent to the oscillator. If you already know that your oscillator can only play 7 octaves, you can set the range to match. Control is where you set the MIDI CC number. This corresponds with the row below where it says control 0%. The next field law is set with encoder 10. Here you can select between volt per octave, hertz per volt, gate, and envelope. For my setup, I set it to volt per octave as the hCB will convert everything to 1.2 volts per octave Booklet standard. When you have volt per octave selected, the field to the right will change to a value named V-scale. This is for adjusting the spacing between the notes. If you instead of turning it, press encoder 11, you get to the calibration page that I mentioned earlier. I'll go in depth with that later. Note velocity and control values will all be sent out through the same blue output. So which one to turn up depends on what you intend to use output for. If you're using it to send out pitch CV, note should be set to 100. If used to send step voltage for controlling like the cutoff of a filter, set it to 0 and turn up either velocity or control. For control to work, you have to assign the same CC number as set in the row above to an aux row in the pattern menu. To do that, you go into the pattern menu, press and rotate the row encoder once clockwise and select the CC number. Now you can activate and turn up steps and the voltage will be added to the blue output. In the control field in the row above, before the first CC number, there's an option called Bend as in pitch bend. The control field in the row below now changes to Bend and the value is displayed in semitones. Go back to the pattern menu and press and rotate the row encoder twice clockwise to get into the aux event menu. Scroll down till you get to MIDI send and from that menu select Send MIDI P Bend. Now you have control over pitch bend. The next field is gate. There are two gate modes, normal and retrig. These deal with how the Cirklon handles overlap in nodes. In normal, the gate will continue to stay high while the nodes overlap. In retrig, every overlap in node will cause a small break and the gate will retrigger the envelope. Finally, we have slide that has two settings: slide mode and slide time. Here I'm demonstrating what happens in linear mode as you increase the time. This is what it looks and sounds like in exponential mode. The A in A linear and A exponential stands for automatic. In this mode, the slide only occurs when the nodes overlap, such as when playing legato, extending the length of a note past the beginning of the next, or adding ties and P3 patterns. If you set it to linear, the slide is always active. It's the same relationship between exponential and A exponential mode. If you scroll past the pages of the first 16 blue outputs, you get to the pages where you can configure the 4 red outputs and 4 green outputs that can also work as inputs. First, you set the mode that can either be gate or clock. I'll keep it on gate for now. Choosing one of the 16 CV numbers will link a gate to one of the blue outputs. Scrolling past the CV numbers, you also have an option of selecting an incoming MIDI channel to link a gate to. There are 3 gate types to choose from: normal, S-trig, that's a Moog style short to ground gate, and inverse. When setting the mode to clock, the second field will change to pulses per quarter note. Here there are also a few options to choose from. Run will send out a high gate while the Cirklon is playing. Trig will send a short trigger every time you start the Cirklon. Numbers set the amount of pulses per quarter note. The way this works is that you have 2 encoders, 6 and 8, that will play the note C with 2 octaves apart, the low and the high C. These 2 encoders will toggle between play and stop. The encoders to their right is where you tune the note. The tuner has a high resolution, so you might have to turn it many times. The good thing about this is that you get the tuning set extremely precise, and you only have to do it once per oscillator. In the compare field, you can assign an instrument that will play a reference note. However, this doesn't work with an instrument connected via the CVIO. I recommend a digital synth. With an instrument selected, it will play along with the low and high C, serving as a reference so you can tune by ear. I prefer using a digital tuner, so I won't assign an instrument. I start by tuning the oscillator to the low C. I have chosen C3. I press encoder 8 to play the high C and dial encoder 9 clockwise to increase the pitch. I then return to the low C and dial encoder 7 clockwise for the last bit of fine tuning. and presto, your oscillator is now tracking accurately. As mentioned, the green bananas can be used as inputs. Here I will show you how you can send CV from your modular back into the Cirklon, modulating the stages of an envelope generated by the Cirklon. This section of the 2AT Animated Tricillator is an 8-output swarm LFO. It is identical to the electric dompteur model HED, also from Northern Light Modular. I'm sending out 4 of these slightly out-of-phase LFOs into the green inputs of the hCB. For the green bananas to work as inputs, the little switch next to it needs to be pointing up. I'll now move on to show you how I set it up on the Cirklon. So first part is to set up the CVIO Config page. Click Menu, More and select CVIO Config. Scroll past the first 16 outputs to the end where it says CV in. Here you can set how many of the green bananas should be used as inputs. I set it to 4. Since I've already patched in the 4 LFOs, you can right away see the voltage coming in. So now the green bananas 5, 6, 7 and 8 are showing the incoming modulation CV. Another important thing to set up on this page is the MIDI CC number. Here I have it set up so the output 5 has CC number 1, output 6 has CC number 2, output 7 has CC number 3, and output 8 has CC number 4. We'll get to why this is important in a bit. The next step is to set up the envelopes. I'll be using blue bananas output 9 and 10 for this. So I turn encoder 5 to scroll up to the middle row, and then I turn encoder 10 until it says envelope in the law field. You'll notice how the row below changes. Attack, decay, sustain, and release are the parameters we wish to modulate. So to be able to do that, we need to set the MIDI CC number to correspond to those of the 4 green banana inputs. I'll set the CC number to 1. That way you map CC number 1 to attack, and automatically the following 3 numbers, 2, 3, and 4 to decay, sustain, and release. I'll do the same for output 10, also with a control number 1. Next up is the MIDI port configuration menu. Click on Menu, press More and select MIDI port config. Using the value encoder, I scroll down past the 5 MIDI ports till I get to where it says CV. I've been experimenting with these settings and have discovered 2 ways that you can make it work here. However, I've only found out how you can configure it so the incoming CV can affect 1 internal envelope at a time. The first possibility is to click past where it says through and past 1-NN to where it says 1-1. Instead of clicking encoder 7 rotated clockwise, we have to scroll past the 5 MIDI ports represented by the value on the left side. The value on the right side is the MIDI channel number. Continue till you reach CV9, since I have configured output 9 to work as an envelope. So press save and exit the menu. I have created an instrument assigned to track 2 called CVIO 09. Most often I would use a P3 pattern for this, as pitch and polyphony has no impact on an envelope track. But I've chosen a CK pattern because this will enable me to zoom in on the signature time base and make little bursts of envelopes in 32 or 64 time multiplications. In other instances, I would favor a P3 pattern due to all the possibilities you get with the aux events, particularly randomization. I haven't set up any track values yet. Let's do that so we can see what's going on. First I press encoder 6 to select the first field where I'm going to set up a track value. Press insert and press the value encoder to select MIDI CC. I've already labeled CC numbers 1 to 4, but let me do it again real quick so you can see how it's done. Scroll over to the label field and click on the value encoder to open up the keyboard. So I'll just delete a T so I only get a 2-letter abbreviation. Done with that, I click the value encoder to close the keyboard and press save. Now I can see the incoming modulation CV affecting attack on the track values page. I do the same for decay, sustain, and release. So now it's working on the envelope on output 9, but there's another way of setting it up so you're not restricted to modulating just one envelope. If you go back to the MIDI port config menu and select edit track, Now the incoming CV will be sent to whichever track is being edited on the track page. I've selected CVIO 10 to edit, since this output has also been set out as an envelope. The incoming CV will now modulate this output while the track page is open. You can still only have the incoming CV modulate one envelope at a time, but this way you can quickly switch between which envelope it modulates. In addition to the before mentioned LFO section on the 2AT, it has 3 voices, each with 4 waveforms, each with their own VCA. In this patch I'm using 8 envelopes from the Cirklon to open up these VCAs. And that wraps up this video. I hope that you found it useful. Let me know in the comment section if I've gotten something wrong, or you have any suggestions to how to do something in a smarter way. Until next time.